Of all the flights you've ever taken, do you remember the one where something inside you shifted? What if, in a moment of sheer panic, you reach for safety and accidentally touch the beginning of everything? What if that hand, held in the wrong place at the wrong time, led you straight into the life you never thought you deserved? Livia Bennett was just another woman trying to rebuild her world, quiet, careful, and fiercely independent. David Whitmore was a man too polished to be touched, let alone reached. But one turbulent flight, one unintentional grasp, changed everything. What would you do if life threw you into the arms of someone far beyond your world, then made you choose between protecting your heart or finally opening it? This isn't just a story about love. It's about the moments that find us when we least expect them, and the courage it takes to stay when everything in us wants to run. If you've ever been scared to hope again, this story might be for you. Like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Let's begin. Livia Bennett had never been on a plane. At 33, she had driven through 3 states, taken trains, buses, and once even a ferry in heavy rain, but never flown. Airports made her anxious. The noise, the people, the security lines. But this time, she didn't have a choice. A new job was waiting in New York City, a chance to start over. As she walked down the jet bridge, gripping her boarding pass like a lifeline, her palms were already damp. Her tote bag kept slipping off her shoulder, and she couldn't remember if she'd turned off the stove before leaving her apartment in Boston. She found her seat, 23A, window, just like she requested. The cabin felt smaller than she expected, tighter. She sat down slowly, exhaled deeply, and tried to follow the breathing exercises she had read about the night before. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Happy thoughts. She whispered, just get to New York. She fumbled with the seatbelt, tugging it the wrong way, then too hard the other way, until the buckle slipped from her hand and hit her thigh. Her nerves buzzed like static electricity. People were still boarding, talking, laughing, completely unaware that her heart felt like it might give out. She looked out the window. Gray sky, the kind that couldn't decide if it wanted to rain. Then, a voice. "Excuse me, I think that's my seat." She turned and nearly forgot how to breathe. The man standing in the aisle was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark navy suit that looked like it had never known a wrinkle. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, but it was his eyes, steel blue, quiet, and unsettlingly calm, that caught her off guard. "Oh, sorry," she stammered, scrambling to lift her tote bag from the seat beside her. The bag was heavier than she remembered. One strap got tangled with the seat belt. She yanked once, twice on the third tug. The bag flew upward and knocked into the man's shoulder. "Oh, no, no. I'm sorry. I didn't mean." "It's fine," he said, his voice low and even, like someone who never needed to raise it. He rubbed his shoulder lightly, then smiled, not smug, not irritated, just amused. She wanted to disappear. He took the aisle seat and settled in beside her. She could smell a hint of something warm, maybe cedarwood and coffee. She folded her hands tightly on her lap. First flight, first job in a new city, first time elbow to elbow with a man who looked like he belonged in a boardroom, not a coach seat next to a walking panic attack. "Is it your first time flying?" he asked. She blinked. Was it that obvious? Just a guess, he said, glancing toward her hands, still white-knuckled on her lap. The flight attendant came by to check seatbelts. Livia smiled awkwardly, her own belt still unfastened and tangled like an old pair of headphones. The attendant helped her, kindly, and moved on. David. She later learned his name was David. Turned to her again. Try to relax. Statistically speaking, this is one of the safest forms of travel. Please don't finish that sentence, she muttered, covering her ears instinctively. He chuckled. Fair enough. The plane began to taxi. Livia inhaled sharply, her fingers digging into the armrest. The aircraft shuddered slightly as it turned toward the runway. Her stomach flipped, and then it happened. As the plane accelerated, her body instinctively leaned to the left, seeking support. Her hand moved before her brain caught up and landed firmly on David's upper thigh. Warm. Firm. Very much not an armrest. It took her exactly 1 second to realize where she had placed her hand, and another to yank it back like she'd touched a hot stove. Oh my gosh, I didn't mean to, it was the oh no. David's eyebrows raised slightly, and then, to her horror, he laughed, a quiet, rumbling laugh that made her ears burn. Well, he said, still grinning, that's one way to break the ice. She buried her face in her hands. Just kill me now, she mumbled. He leaned back, adjusted his suit, and said, Don't worry, I've survived worse takeoffs. For the rest of the flight, Livia kept her eyes glued to the window. Even though clouds blocked most of the view, her heart rate didn't settle until somewhere over Connecticut. David, meanwhile, had already pulled out a tablet and was calmly reading some sort of report. She stole a glance. The man she just grabbed was probably a lawyer or an executive, someone who never spilled coffee or tripped on curbs. Definitely someone who didn't belong in her world. When the captain announced their descent, she sighed in relief. But as the wheels touched down and the cabin shook slightly, David turned to her. You did good, he said. Most people cry or faint. Livia forced a smile. Then, without another word, she unbuckled her seatbelt, grabbed her tote, and all but ran off the plane. She didn't even look back. But David did. He watched her disappear down the jet bridge, this woman who panicked, fumbled, and grabbed the wrong place, and smiled to himself. Interesting, he murmured, more to the clouds outside than anyone else. The Monday morning air in Manhattan felt different, thicker somehow. Livia Bennett stood outside the tall glass tower with her new employee badge clutched tightly in one hand and a to-go coffee in the other. Whitmore Tech's logo gleamed above the revolving doors. It looked exactly like the pictures she had Googled. Okay. Breathe, she whispered to herself. You survived the flight. You can survive this. She stepped through the lobby. Marble floors. Brass elevators. Every corner seemed to shine. She felt small, but hopeful. The receptionist on the 25th floor greeted her with a polite smile and waved her into a conference room where the new hires were gathered. Livia took a seat near the back, smoothed out her skirt, and took another deep breath. Just a meeting, orientation, maybe an awkward icebreaker. Nothing to fear. Then the door opened. A tall man in a tailored gray suit walked in. His posture was relaxed, but his presence filled the room. Livia didn't register the face right away, not until he spoke. Good morning, everyone. I'm David Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Tech. The words hit like thunder. Her spine stiffened. Her fingers froze mid-sip of coffee. No, 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 no. She looked up slowly, and there he was. The man from the plane. The man she accidentally groped in a moment of turbulence. The man she thought she'd never see again. David. His eyes scanned the room with professional ease until they landed on her. And for a split second, his expression faltered. She sank into her chair as if she could disappear through the floor. Her mind screamed, not him. Anyone but him. But he didn't say a word about it. Didn't blink twice. David continued the presentation like nothing had happened. Charts, projections, company values, all delivered in that calm, composed tone of his. But Livia wasn't hearing a word. Her mind kept flashing back to the flight, to her hand on his leg, to his teasing smile. And now he was her boss. When the meeting ended, she tried to escape through the crowd of new hires, but fate had other plans. Miss Bennett, someone called. She froze, turned. It was him. David stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, relaxed but very much watching her. "Welcome to the team," he said, lips twitching into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I trust your second landing went better than the first." She blinked, her face flushed. I guess I'm not great with arrivals," she muttered, avoiding his gaze. "Don't worry," he replied. "You're not the first to panic on a plane. You're just the first to make such memorable contact." He winked. She nearly dropped her coffee. "I'm really sorry about that," she whispered. "Still am." "Don't be," he said gently. "It made my week far more interesting." Before she could respond, a junior manager walked over and began introducing her to the IT team. David gave her one last look, polite but distant, and disappeared into a sea of executives. Livia let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. The IT department was on the 18th floor, bright, open, and filled with monitors and half-drunk mugs of coffee. Her desk was small but cozy. A young analyst named Rachel helped her settle in. "Don't worry," Rachel said. "Everyone's nice. And the CEO almost never comes down here." Livia smiled awkwardly. "I've heard interesting things about him," she murmured. Oh, Rachel leaned closer. "Like what? Like..." "He has a good memory." Rachel laughed, clearly not getting the joke. As the hours passed, Livia did her best to focus on her screen. She buried herself in the network maps and onboarding documents. But every time the elevator chimed or someone in a suit passed the hallway, her stomach tightened. At one point, she caught her reflection in the dark window. Same wide eyes, same uncertainty. "New start," she whispered to herself. "Don't ruin it." But she couldn't shake the feeling. Something had shifted the moment she recognized him. It wasn't just panic or embarrassment. It was the way he looked at her. Not like a CEO looking at a new hire, but like someone who remembered something. Oddly personal. She hated how that made her feel. Excited, scared, seen. She wasn't used to being seen. Later that afternoon, her computer froze mid-login. She sighed and started troubleshooting. "Need a hand?" a voice said behind her. She turned and nearly choked. David. Again. He stood at her cubicle, a file folder in hand, eyebrows raised. "I just came down to check on the new systems." He added quickly, "It's vital to our infrastructure." She nodded, trying not to panic. Oh, yes. Well, it's freezing, but I'm handling it. He leaned slightly closer. You always handle things yourself? The question hung in the air, a second too long. I try, she said, eyes locked on the screen. There was a pause. Then he stepped back. Let me know if it crashes completely, he said. I know someone in upper management. And just like that, he was gone. Livia slumped in her chair. Her face was red. Her heart was racing. What was happening? This wasn't just a job anymore. It was something else. Something unfolding. Something that made her both hope and fear at the same time. By Friday, Livia Bennett was ready to disappear into the floor. She had spent the entire week tiptoeing through her job like a nervous intern, double-checking emails, avoiding elevators where she might run into him, and pretending her accidental hand placement during that flight was a distant, blurry memory. It wasn't. It lived rent-free in her head. David Whitmore, on the other hand, floated through the office like he belonged to a different time zone. Polished, focused, and annoyingly unbothered. He passed through meetings with precision, his voice low but commanding, his presence magnetic. She hadn't spoken to him again since that one brief visit to her cubicle. But that didn't mean she didn't notice him. She did. Every time he walked down the hallway. Every time his voice echoed from the conference room. Every time her coworkers whispered, "There he is." He was always there, a presence just at the edge of her awareness. On Friday morning, she arrived early, hoping for a quiet start. The IT floor was mostly empty. She booted her computer, sipped her coffee, and tried to lose herself in code. That was the plan. Until the network crashed. 1 second, she was uploading a patch. The next, black screen. "Oh, come on," she muttered, checking connections. Then the phone on her desk rang. This is Livia." A familiar voice answered. "Seems like someone unplugged the internet. Any chance you can come up?" Her fingers froze around the mouse. "David, yes. Of course. Right away." The executive floor was quieter, more glass, more silence. Everything smelled like money and eucalyptus. She knocked gently on the frosted glass door that read, "David Whitmore, CEO. Come in." He was seated at his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled. The skyline stretched behind him like a painting. "Thanks for coming up," he said, "My system's being dramatic." She approached cautiously. "Probably just a permissions glitch. I'll check the network config." As she leaned over his desk, her heart pounded. She could feel him watching her, not in a predatory way, but with interest. "You seem calmer today," he said, not looking at the screen. She kept typing, trying. "Good. First weeks are always strange. New people, new roles." She nodded. "And new situations." He chuckled, low and amused, like flying hands. She stopped typing. Then slowly, she looked at him. "You're not going to let that go, are you?" "No," he admitted, smiling, but only because it was the highlight of a very long travel day. She rolled her eyes, finally smiling herself. "Well, I'm glad my public humiliation served someone." "It wasn't humiliating," he said gently. "It was human. And honestly, kind of refreshing." That caught her off guard. Refreshing. He met her gaze. "Most people I meet are rehearsed, polished, strategic. You were none of that." She blinked. "I was a mess. Yes," he said, "but an honest one." Something warm flickered between them, unspoken. It didn't last, because just then, the door opened, and two senior partners walked in. David straightened. Livia instinctively stepped back. "Livia's just fixing the system," David explained smoothly. The partners nodded, barely glancing at her. Their attention was all for David's statistics, deadlines, weekend reports. Livia packed up quietly. "Everything's good now," she said. David gave her a brief nod. "Thanks." She left the room, trying not to walk too fast, back on the IT floor. Rachel raised her eyebrows. "You look flushed," she said. "Did something break?" "Just a network loop," Livia replied, setting down her laptop. Rachel smirked, or a heartbeat. Livia didn't answer. Instead, she opened her email and saw it. An internal memo. Quarterly strategy session next week. All department heads must attend. Select IT representatives welcome. Final list to be announced. Her stomach sank. She had a bad feeling she knew what was coming. Monday morning arrived with an email from HR Livia Bennett. "Please join the executive planning session this Thursday as IT liaison. Attendance is mandatory." Of course. She sat at her desk, staring at the screen. This wasn't about technical merit. It was about him. The man whose systems she fixed. The man she couldn't stop noticing. The man who remembered the exact way she panicked 30,000 feet in the air. And now, she had to sit across from him at a board table. It was chaos. Emotional. Professional chaos. She glanced at the elevator, and, like clockwork, David stepped out tall, composed, holding his usual folder. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just that. Her, him, and the weight of everything neither of them could say. The conference room was colder than necessary. Livia Bennett adjusted the sleeves of her cardigan, hoping no one could hear how loudly her heart was beating. The table stretched long and glossy in front of her, filled with department heads, senior strategists, and high-level executives. Everyone had their own folders, laptops, and unreadable expressions. And at the head of the table sat David Whitmore. He hadn't acknowledged her presence directly, not yet. But he had noticed. She saw it in the way his eyes lingered one breath longer when he scanned the room, in the way his voice softened ever so slightly when he introduced the IT department. Her seat was 2 chairs down from him, safely buffered by the head of HR and a marketing director. But she could feel him, the space around him, the unspoken awareness between them. He was quiet today, less polished, more pensive. She didn't dare wonder why. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Most of it was review, projections, action items. She kept her head down, took notes, answered 2 technical questions, and didn't speak unless asked. But once, during a budget discussion, she glanced up and found him already looking at her. She looked away quickly. It wasn't the kind of glance that asked for a reply. It was the kind that asked a question neither of them had the language for. When the session ended, people filed out slowly, still talking numbers. Livia gathered her things, hoping to slip out unnoticed. "Bennett." His voice called gently, not loud, not commanding, but enough to stop her. She turned. David stood by the windows, sunlight cutting across his face in clean, sharp lines. "Do you have a minute?" She hesitated, then nodded. The room emptied. He leaned against the window frame, hands folded in front of him. "You handled yourself well today," he said. "Thanks," she replied, holding her notebook a little too tightly. I know this isn't exactly your comfort zone. She gave a tight smile. Being surrounded by executives talking about 5-year capital plans. Yeah, not my usual Monday. He chuckled. There was a pause. Then he added, I've been thinking about that flight. Her heart stuttered. Oh, he looked out the window, voice thoughtful. People show you who they really are when they're nervous, afraid, unfiltered. You showed me someone I liked, even if it came with a little bruised pride. Livia shifted her weight. David, I work here now. He nodded slowly. I know. This is complicated. Another nod. Also true. She exhaled, glancing around the empty room. I'm not sure what's happening here, but I know what it looks like. And what does it look like? Like a junior IT technician trying to catch the attention of her CEO. Like something messy, inappropriate. David's eyes narrowed not in anger, but in consideration. Do you think I see you that way? She looked at him. No, she said quietly. But other people will. He didn't respond for a moment. Then softly, let me ask you something. If I wasn't the CEO, would this still feel wrong? Livia blinked. Yes, she admitted, because I'm not good at this. At feelings, or timing, or figuring out if I'm seeing something that isn't really there. His voice was quieter now. You're not imagining it. The room felt smaller, quieter, more dangerous in all the right ways. But what do we do with that? She whispered. He took a step closer, but not too close. He didn't want to push, just stand in the same gravity. I don't know yet, he said, but I don't want to ignore it. That night, Livia couldn't sleep. She sat on her small balcony in Brooklyn, the city buzzing faintly below. A mug of cold tea rested beside her. She wore an old sweater and soft socks and stared at the apartment lights blinking on and off across the street. Everything inside her felt unsettled. David Whitmore was the last person she should feel anything for. He was power in a tailored suit. He was structure, order, and all the clean lines she could never draw in her own life. And yet, he had also been kind, curious, gentle in ways he didn't show the world. He remembered things she didn't expect him to. He listened, but that didn't make it safe. She pulled her knees to her chest. What if this ended badly? What if she misread everything worse? What if she didn't, and it was still doomed? She had rebuilt so much after Boston, after the divorce, after losing the life she thought she wanted. She wasn't sure she had another crash landing in her. And yet, when he looked at her, it felt like she was being seen, really seen, not for her title, or her mistakes, or the version she tried to project, but for the part of her still quietly rebuilding behind the scenes. That part it wanted to believe. The next morning, she arrived early again. This time, she wasn't alone. David was already there, standing at the coffee machine in the break room, usually occupied by interns. Morning, he said, without turning. She stood in the doorway. I didn't know you drank the same terrible office brew as the rest of us. He smiled. Sometimes it's good to be reminded of that I'm human. She took a cup, stood beside him. I don't know where this is going. She said, I don't either. He replied, but I think it's worth finding out. Her hand brushed his accidentally as she reached for the sugar. Neither of them pulled away. It started with the sound of high heels. Sharp, deliberate, echoing down the hallway, outside the IT department like a warning bell. Livia Bennett barely looked up from her screen. She figured it was someone from HR or one of the legal aides. Nothing unusual. Until the footsteps stopped right at her desk. "Excuse me?" a voice asked. Livia turned. The woman standing before her looked like she'd stepped out of a Manhattan fashion editorial, perfectly tailored burgundy dress. Sleek blonde hair pinned in a twist, red lipstick flawless and cold. She wasn't smiling. Livia stood slowly. "Can I help you?" The woman crossed her arms. "You're Livia, correct?" "Yes." The woman tilted her head. "Thought so." She glanced around, then leaned closer across the desk. Her perfume was expensive and suffocating. "I just thought you should know," she said softly, with that chilling smile women use when pretending to be polite. "You're playing a very dangerous game with someone who belongs to me." Livia froze. I'm sorry. What?" The woman straightened. Voice calm. "David Whitmore. He's my husband. And whatever you think this is, it's not going to last. It never does. Trust me." Livia blinked, trying to breathe. Her heart thudded like a drum in her throat. "Your husband." The woman gave a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Men like him, they get distracted, but they always come back. Eventually, he'll remember where he belongs." She reached into her designer bag, pulled out a business card, and placed it face down on Livia's desk. "Be smart, Miss Bennett. Walk away before it gets messy." And with that, she turned and walked out, heels clicking against the floor, like a gavel of final judgment. Livia stood motionless. For a full minute, she couldn't hear anything except the rushing in her ears. She stared at the card. Joanne Whitmore. She didn't know how she got to David's office. She barely remembered knocking, just that the door was already cracked open, and he looked up from his desk and went pale the second he saw her face. "Livia." She stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and crossed her arms tightly across her chest. "Are you married?" The silence that followed was unbearable. David stood slowly. What she didn't back down. "Don't lie to me. Are you married?" He looked stunned more than that. Horrified. "No. God, no. I'm not married. I don't play me," she said, voice shaking. "Don't stand there and look at me like you're the victim." A woman came to my desk. "She told me you're her husband." David ran a hand through his hair. His face looked 10 years older in seconds. "Joanne," he muttered. "I should have known." He looked at her, eyes raw. "Livia, I was married. I'm not anymore. The divorce was finalized last fall. But she won't accept it. She shows up sometimes. She pushes boundaries. I didn't think she'd come here." Livia's voice was a whisper. "You should have told me." "I know," he said quietly. "I was going to. I just didn't want that part of my life to touch this." "This is your life," she snapped, louder than she meant to. "You can't carve it up into little safe compartments." David stepped forward, reaching for her hand. She pulled away. "You don't understand," she said, tears rising, throat closing. "I can't do this again. I've already been the woman who was lied to, who was kept in the dark, who believed someone and paid the price." "Livia," he said softly, "please." She shook her head. "I need space. I need time." And then she walked out. That night, Livia sat in her apartment, wrapped in a blanket, staring out the window without seeing a thing. Her tea went cold in her hands. Her mind replayed everything: the flight, the spark, the gentle smiles, the almost somethings. And now, this. She wasn't angry. Not really. She was disappointed, tired, worn down by the weight of what could have been. Claire, her elderly neighbor, and the closest thing she had to a surrogate mother, knocked gently on the door. Livia opened it without a word. Claire walked in, took one look at her face, and sat down beside her. "I don't need the whole story," Claire said, wrapping an old shawl around both of them. "Just tell me one thing. Do you believe he meant to hurt you?" Livia hesitated. "No," she said finally. "I don't think he did." "Then why are you pushing him away?" "Because it hurts anyway." Claire patted her hand. "That's what love does, sweetheart. It digs in where it matters most." Livia closed her eyes. She wished it didn't feel so true. The next morning, David showed up at her building. He didn't text, didn't call, just stood there, at the front door, holding a bouquet of simple white tulips, her favorite. Livia looked down from her window, and for the first time since the flight, she didn't know what to do. David Whitmore hadn't stood in front of a woman's door like this since college. No boardroom negotiation had ever made his hands sweat. No investor pitch had ever made his heart race like this. But as he waited outside Livia Bennett's apartment, holding the bouquet of tulips he'd learned were her favorite from a passing conversation weeks ago, he suddenly felt 16 again. He raised his hand to knock and hesitated. What if she didn't open? What if this was already too broken to mend? But the thought of walking away, of doing nothing, felt worse. So he knocked. Footsteps. A pause. The door opened. She stood there in sweatpants and a faded sweatshirt. Her hair pulled into a messy bun. Her face bare. Eyes tired but clear. David held out the flowers. "I'm not here to defend myself," he said softly. "I just didn't want to leave things where they were." Livia took the bouquet without speaking. She stepped aside to let him in. They sat in silence for a few minutes. David looked around. Her apartment was small, lived in, filled with books and soft blankets and mismatched mugs. It felt like her, quiet, real, no performance. "I should have told you about Joanne," he began. Livia didn't interrupt. "She was once someone I believed I could build a life with, but it turned out we were building different things in the same house. When it ended, she didn't want to let go. And truthfully, part of me didn't want to explain that to anyone." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't want you to see me as broken." Livia's voice was quiet. "I'm not afraid of broken. I'm afraid of lies." David met her eyes. "I didn't lie. I just withheld. And that's on me." She sat back, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "I've spent the last few years rebuilding trust in myself, in my instincts. After my divorce, I promised I'd never ignore red flags again. I don't want to be a flag," he said. "I want to be a choice. One you can make without fear." Livia looked at him for a long time. "Why me?" It wasn't a flirt. It was a real question, stripped of vanity. David didn't hesitate. "Because when I talk to you, I don't feel like I have to prove anything. Because you don't flinch at silence. Because you make my world feel less like a machine and more like a life." The room held stillness. But it wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken understanding. Livia finally said, I don't know if I'm ready to trust this. To trust us? You don't have to be ready, David replied. I'll wait. But I needed you to know you weren't wrong. You didn't imagine it. What's between us? It's real. He stood. I'll go now. Just keep the flowers, even if it's all I'm allowed to give you. He walked to the door. Livia's voice stopped him. David. He turned. Do you regret meeting me on that flight? He smiled. Slowly. Not for a second. The days that followed were quiet. Livia returned to work. She focused on her projects, avoided eye contact in the hallways, and kept her world tightly sealed. No one mentioned the incident. No one asked questions. Except for Claire, who stopped by one evening with 2 mugs of cocoa and a stern look. You can't keep avoiding what you feel just because it scares you, she said, handing Livia a mug. I'm not avoiding. I'm giving it space. Claire raised an eyebrow. Sweetheart, sometimes space becomes distance, and then distance becomes regret. Livia stared into her cup. I don't know if I can trust someone like him. Then don't trust his title. Trust his actions. Claire patted her knee. And don't forget, he's not the only one taking a risk. A week later, David passed her in the hallway. He didn't stop, didn't speak, but he smiled softly, like someone who knew this wasn't over. And somehow, that smile stayed with her all day. That evening, she opened her laptop and found an unsent draft she'd started the night after he came to her door. A letter. Not to be sent, just words she needed to get out. She read it again. I want to believe you. I do. But it's not just about you. It's about the part of me I'm scared to hand over again. She didn't hit delete. Instead, she added one line. But I'm still here. And maybe that means something. She hit save, and for the first time in days, she slept without dreams. The invitation came on a Thursday morning, hidden among a pile of routine emails. Livia clicked it without thinking, then froze. You've been selected to represent Whitmore Tech at the Global Cybersecurity Summit in Munich. All travel and accommodations arranged. Departure next Friday. Congratulations. Her stomach flipped. Munich. A 3-day international conference. Panels. Networking. Visibility. It was a dream opportunity. And yet, she sat back in her chair, blinking at the screen. She hadn't applied. Hadn't even mentioned an interest. Someone had nominated her, and she knew exactly who. Later that day, she passed David in the corridor. He didn't say a word, just nodded, polite and professional. She didn't stop either, but her mind was racing. Why did he do it? To help, to push her forward, or to give her space? She didn't know what she wanted the answer to be. That night, she sat on the fire escape outside her apartment, city lights flickering below. The plane tickets had already been booked. A first-class seat, hotel information. All arranged. Claire came by with lemon bars and a curious look. You've got that faraway stare again, she said, settling beside her. Livia handed her the printed itinerary. Claire read it over slowly. Well, someone's going to Europe. I didn't ask for this, Livia said. I'm not even sure I deserve it. Don't start with that again. It's not just about the job. Claire, it's him. David. He arranged this. I'm almost certain. Claire took a bite of lemon bar. Then what's the problem? I don't know if I'm being given an opportunity or being sent away. Claire looked at her. Maybe it's both. Livia sighed. If I go, I might miss the window. If I stay, I might miss the world. Claire wiped powdered sugar from her fingers. Sweetheart, doors don't stay open forever, but they also don't slam shut without warning. Sometimes they creak, and you have to decide if you're brave enough to walk through before the sound stops. Livia looked down at the folded itinerary. She didn't feel brave. She felt like someone pretending to be. The following Monday, she found a note on her desk. Not an email, not a Slack message, an actual handwritten note. Livia, Munich is yours, if you want it. No strings, just a belief in your brilliance. She stared at it for a long time. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't loaded. It was generous. Too generous. And yet it stung. Because generosity, in her experience, always came with a price. And even if this didn't, it felt like an echo of something she had feared her whole life being sent away when things got complicated. On Thursday, she made her decision. She went to David's office, knocked softly, and waited. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. I'm going, she said, to Munich. He nodded. I'm glad. She stepped further into the room. But before I go, I need to ask you something. He closed the folder on his desk. Ask? Why me? David stood, walked slowly toward the window. You mean why did I nominate you, or why do I care about you? Both. He turned to her. Because you're not afraid to question what's handed to you. Because you see things others miss. Because you challenge me not in meetings, not in tech briefs, but in how I think about my own life. He stepped closer. And because the first time I met you, you were terrified, messy, and entirely real. And I haven't stopped thinking about you since. Livia's voice was low. I don't want to be a detour in your life. You're not, he said. You're the first real direction I've had in a while. The silence stretched. Then she nodded. I just needed to hear that. And she left without looking back. The flight to Munich was smooth, too smooth. No turbulence, no accidental touches. Just clouds and quiet. Livia stared out the window, remembering her first flight, how her heart had nearly exploded. This time, she was calm. But that didn't mean she wasn't scared. She arrived at the hotel late evening. Her name was on the reservation. Her room had a view of the city skyline and a note from the summit organizers welcoming her personally. She placed her suitcase by the bed, opened the curtains, and stood for a long moment. She was here. She had made it. And yet, a part of her still felt 1,000 miles away from herself, from him, from the question neither of them had dared to answer. What are we becoming? At the conference the next morning, she was flawless. Her panel on data resilience earned a standing ovation. She fielded questions like a veteran. Executives asked for her card. A major investor complimented her clarity. She should have felt proud. Instead, she felt hollow. At lunch, she stepped outside into the courtyard garden. Snow was starting to fall in light flakes, dusting the stone benches. She sat down, tugged her coat tighter, and whispered to the air, "Why do I only feel seen when he's watching?" And maybe that was the real question. Not about trust, not about power, but about presence and how it had begun to shape her. She wasn't sure if she missed him or if she missed the version of herself she was brave enough to be when he was around. And either way, it scared her. The third day of the summit ended with applause. Livia Bennett stood on the stage, blinking under warm lights, the echo of her final presentation still fading from the high ceilings of the Munich ballroom. She just delivered the keynote speech on ethical AI protocols, a topic many found dry, but which she had poured her entire mind and heart into. She was graceful, composed, brilliant. And yet, as she stepped down, smiling politely at the hands reaching to congratulate her, she felt a familiar ache behind her ribs. It wasn't pride. It wasn't even relief. It was absence. There was no one in the audience looking at her like she mattered beyond the title on her badge. No steel blue eyes silently cheering her on. No presence that anchored her. She had made it, but part of her wondered who she was making it for. Later that night, after a formal dinner and 100 exhausting introductions, she slipped out early and returned to her hotel room. The lights of Munich glowed golden outside her window. The city felt ancient and mysterious, like it had secrets she wasn't meant to learn. She took off her heels, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the silence in. Her phone buzzed. A message from Rachel, back in New York. He's been a ghost all week. Keeps looking out the windows. Everyone thinks you broke him. Livia smiled, just barely. Then another message arrived. Unknown number, room 1803. If you're still awake. D. Her breath caught. For a long moment, she stared at the screen. The room number wasn't his way of pushing. It was an invitation, a threshold. And the question was no longer if she cared. It was whether she was brave enough to admit it. She stood slowly, smoothed her sweater, and left her room. When she knocked on the door, her hand trembled. It opened almost instantly. David stood there, no suit, no shield, just jeans, a soft navy shirt, and eyes that looked like they hadn't rested in days. Hi, she said, voice small. Hi, he echoed, like it meant more. She stepped inside. The room was quiet. A tray of room service sat untouched on the table. His laptop was closed. He had been waiting. For her. I didn't expect you to come, he said. I didn't expect to want to, she replied. Silence fell between them again, comfortable, like it always had been, and painful, like it never used to be. I watched your keynote, he said finally. She looked up, startled. You were there in the back. He nodded. Didn't want to distract you. You flew to Munich. He shrugged. I had a meeting in Berlin, but I detoured. She folded her arms, part of her still trying not to melt. Why? He stepped forward, slowly, like someone approaching a fragile thing, because I needed to know if I'd missed my chance. Her eyes shimmered. And he searched her face. I don't know yet. Have I Livia's breath came uneven? I don't want to be someone's unfinished business. David, I don't want to be the moment you chase when real life gets complicated. You're not, he said. You're the moment I choose, even when it's complicated. His voice cracked slightly, especially then. She looked at him for a long time. You broke my trust, she said. I know. You didn't mean to. But you still did. I know that too. And yet, she whispered, stepping closer, you came. David reached for her hand, slowly, gently, like asking permission. She didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped into his arms, her head resting against his chest, where his heartbeat pounded like thunder. They stood like that for what felt like years. No apologies, no promises, just presence. And for the first time in a long, long while, she felt like she had come home. The next morning, Livia opened her eyes to the sound of rain against the windows. The sky over Munich was soft gray, and David was sitting in the armchair, reading the note she'd scribbled in her notebook on the flight over. He looked up when he noticed her awake. "But I'm still here, and maybe that means something," he read aloud. She blushed. "I was going to delete that." He smiled, folding the paper carefully. "I'm glad you didn't." The flight back to New York was quiet. Not awkward, not distant, just quiet. Livia sat by the window, her hand resting lightly in David's. The sky beyond was painted in soft streaks of gold and blue. Somewhere over the Atlantic. She realized she no longer felt afraid of flying. Not because the turbulence had stopped, but because she knew how to steady herself now. David glanced at her occasionally, never pushing conversation. His silence, like always, wasn't absence, it was space. Space to think, to breathe, to simply be. Back in Manhattan, the world spun quickly again. Emails, meetings, catch-ups. But something had changed. People noticed. Livia walked through the Whitmore Tech halls with a different posture, calmer, but also surer of herself. She didn't hide behind her screen or her reports anymore. She spoke up in meetings, offered ideas that once stayed trapped in her notes. And David, he didn't hover, didn't interfere, but every once in a while, their eyes would meet across a room, and something unspoken would pass between them like a quiet flame. It wasn't scandalous. It wasn't rushed. It was real, and that made it powerful. One Thursday morning, Rachel cornered Livia at the coffee machine. "Okay, I'm saying this as a friend," she said, "but you've been glowing since Germany. Is it the European chocolate or something else?" Livia laughed, pouring sugar into her cup. "Maybe it's learning to stop running." Rachel raised an eyebrow. From work, Livia looked down at the coffee, then smiled. "No, from myself." Later that week, David asked her to join him for a meeting off-site. She met him outside a small brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. He held a folder under one arm and 2 coffees in hand. "This isn't a client," he said as he handed her a cup. "It's something I've been thinking about for a long time." They stepped inside. The building was old but sturdy. Sunlight spilled through large windows onto wooden floors. The space echoed slightly empty, but filled with possibility. "What is this?" Livia asked, looking around. David set down the folder on a table. "I bought this place 5 years ago," he said. "It was supposed to be a side project, a community tech hub, free classes, job training, support for young engineers who couldn't afford school." He looked around the dusty room. "But I got busy. Life happened. Joanne happened. Then I lost the heart for it." Livia ran her fingers along the edge of the windowsill. "It's beautiful," she said softly. He looked at her. "I want to bring it back to life, but not alone." She turned to him. "David." "Why me?" "Because you see what matters beneath the surface. Because you're not afraid of fixing things others would throw away. And because I trust your vision." She studied his face and slowly nodded. "Okay, let's do it." The following months were a blur of paint, wiring, website mock-ups, and late-night pizza. They hired interns from underrepresented neighborhoods, invited speakers, partnered with local colleges. What began as an abandoned idea became something that pulsed with meaning. And through it all, Livia and David built something far more powerful than any corporate success. They built trust, they built love, and they built it slowly, stone by stone. One afternoon, after a workshop ended, David found Livia standing by the front steps, watching a group of teens walk away laughing. "You did that?" he said, coming up beside her. She smiled. "No, we did." He looked at her, the way her hair caught the sunlight, the way her eyes followed those kids, like she already saw who they could become. "I used to think love had to be dramatic," he said. "Big gestures, grand speeches. But now, I think it's this." She tilted her head. This quiet. This choosing. Every day. Livia's throat tightened. "I spent years thinking I wasn't someone people stayed for," she whispered. David touched her hand. "I'm staying." And in that moment, she believed him. Not because of the words, but because she'd watched him prove it with every look, every act of care, every time he gave her the room to grow. That night, Claire called. She wanted to know everything. Livia told her most of it. Not the details, just the feeling. The feeling of finally understanding that home wasn't a place or a promise. It was a person. And sometimes, it took the wrong flight, the wrong moment, even the wrong question for the right person to show up. The spring air in Brooklyn carried a quiet promise. It was one of those rare Saturdays when the city seemed to exhale. Trees along the brownstone streets were blooming shyly in soft pinks and whites. Children laughed in the distance. The world, for once, didn't feel like it was in a rush. Inside the newly renovated tech hub, the team was preparing for their first open house. Balloons were tied to railings. Flyers were stacked at the welcome table. Volunteers wore t-shirts that read, "Build from within." Livia Bennett stood in the main room, adjusting a welcome banner. Her fingers were nimble, focused, but her heart, it was calm, in a way it hadn't been in years. "Looks perfect." A voice behind her said. She turned. David Whitmore leaned against the doorframe, sleeves rolled, smile quiet. "It does. Doesn't it?" she said, stepping back to admire the space. But she wasn't just looking at the room. She was looking at what they'd built together, brick by brick, word by word. Trust, respect, love. Not a love born from desperation or fear of being alone, but a steady love, a daily love, a choosing. People began to arrive, students, neighbors, teachers. Some came out of curiosity. Others came because they'd heard whispers about the quiet CEO and the woman who changed his entire rhythm. David moved through the crowd with ease, not as a figurehead, but as a host. Livia watched him. He wasn't the man she first saw on that flight, untouchable, perfectly put together. He was something better now, real, present, softened by purpose. At one point, a teenage girl approached Livia shyly. "Are you the one who built this place?" she asked. Livia knelt slightly, smiled. "No," she said. "We did." The girl looked around. "Can I really come here and learn? Even if I'm not good at math, you can come here and try," Livia said. "That's all we ask." The girl beamed and ran off. David appeared beside her. "You handled that perfectly." She reminded me of someone. "Who, me?" Before all of this. David touched her back gently. She's lucky to have found you. Livia turned, looked him in the eyes. I'm lucky I didn't give up before I found you. That night, after the last guest left and the lights were dimmed, they sat together on the back steps of the building. No speeches, no grand gestures, just them, and the sound of the wind playing with the trees. David reached into his coat pocket and pulled something small out. A folded piece of paper. Livia raised an eyebrow. He handed it to her. She unfolded it. It was a boarding pass, her name, a flight number, the date over a year ago. That flight, he said softly. I kept it. Livia laughed gently. You kept this. It was the day everything changed. For me, anyway. She leaned against his shoulder. For me too. Eventually, David turned to her. No matter what happens next, I want you to know something. What you were never just a moment. You've always been the landing. Livia blinked, tears stinging. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to, because the way she rested her head on his shoulder told him everything, and the way he stayed there, unmoving, holding that moment like it was sacred, that told her even more. Months later, they didn't rush to marriage, didn't buy matching mugs or post photos online, but they showed up every day. David brought coffee, always one sugar less than she liked. She left notes in his planner with ridiculous puns. They argued sometimes about internet bandwidth, or when to repaint the office walls. But even the arguments felt safe, because now they both knew love wasn't a performance. It was presence. And theirs had landed gently, quietly, exactly where it belonged. In life, we often carry the quiet weight of old wounds, lost love, broken trust, missed chances. This story reminds us that healing doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it enters quietly through unexpected people, small moments, or a flight we never meant to take. Livia and David's journey isn't just about romance, it's about choice. The choice to trust again, to show up for ourselves, and to believe we're still capable of something beautiful, no matter our past. It speaks to anyone who's been hurt, who's started over, who's feared they were too late, especially as we grow older. We learn that love, real love, is less about grand gestures and more about presence, listening, staying, building something steady with someone who sees not only who we are, but who we've had to become. This story invites us to ask, what would change if we stopped running from what scares us and walked toward what heals us instead? Because perhaps, no matter our age, the most powerful thing we can do is stay open. Let this be a gentle reminder. It's never too late to begin again. Thank you so much for spending your precious time with us and walking alongside Livia and David's journey. If this story touched your heart, made you feel, or reminded you of something deep within you're not alone, don't forget to share this story with someone who might need it, and subscribe to Shining Stories for more heartfelt journeys. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. See you in the next one.